This conference will now be recorded.
And do let me know when you see my screen, guys. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we were doing the other day. So on Friday when we did, leave the session, we were discussing about on how to go ahead and create your Azure subscription. So we said you will have to basically create a new ID or use an existing Gmail ID, and you can go ahead and sign up for Azure. And as in when you sign up for Azure, we said the first thing that you get is called what? A tenant ID. So is tenant ID itself sufficient? Not really. You would need to also subscribe to the Azure subscription. So what we said is that we went ahead and we created something called as a free trial subscription with us. And we said that a free trial subscription is valid for 30 days only. Like when you create a free trial subscription itself, it will tell you what is the validity date, when it starts and when it ends. So in my case, it'll tell me that, you know what, it ends in a particular period. That is like 12th of September. And it'll also give you somewhere around 14,500 credits in your subscription so that you can go ahead and use these credits to, let's say, create resources, to, let's say, do a lot of different things on the Azure subscription. So the very important thing is that you will need a tenant, which you will automatically get when you create an Azure account, and then you'll have to manually go ahead and create a subscription. Now, what were a few essential things when you went ahead and created a subscription is that, of course, your phone number, your email ID, and also a credit card to validate that you are a genuine user. Now, when you give a credit card, basically Azure will charge you 2 rupees for the first time to see that the credit card is valid, and then it'll go ahead and provision your subscription. And one thing it has to be noted that one credit card can only be used once to create a free trial subscription. Now, Azure only allocates once a free trial subscription to a user. Then what after free trial subscription? You can go ahead and upgrade it to different subscription models that we were looking at. So we had pay as you go, we had enterprise support, we had MSDN subscription, and we had professional direct. So there are a lot of subscriptions that are available with Azure once after you expire, or once after your credits expire, or once after your subscription expires. Then the question was that can you basically go ahead, or does Azure basically outright charge you something after your subscription is expired? Like the first 30 days is gone and your credits are also expired. So does your credit card get charged? No, not really. After the first 30 days, if you don't do anything, Azure will say, you know what, the status is not active, but what, disabled. So until and unless you come here and proactively click on upgrade your subscription, and after you click on upgrade your subscription, it will again ask you, okay, fine, is this the credit card that you want to basically continue with? Okay, if then yes, then please go ahead and give me an OTP to your credit card. That's when your Azure subscription will get converted from a free trial to something else like a pay as you go subscription. That's fine. Then after the pay as you go subscription comes in, that is when your actual billing period will start. So in the first 30, Azure will not go ahead and, let's say, charge you out. And we have also discussed that, in today's class, you'll people will go ahead and create a subscription of your own. So I hope everyone has their own subscription, guys. Can anyone confirm that they have created the subscription and where you are facing any issues while creating the subscription out? Guys, anyone?
Yes, I have created.
Okay. So were you able to get the free trial subscription?
Like, what do you mean? Like,
Were you able to create the free trial subscription?
Like we just go to the Azure Microsoft and we just want to create the account. After that,
Okay.
we just want to go for the free 1 month period
Yes.
and just I have my credit details.
Okay.
Then account has been created. That free
Okay.
trial.
Great.
You mean?
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I was wanting to confirm. So yes, that's great. So the other question was, can you have multiple subscription under the same tenant? The answer is yes. Of course, you can have multiple subscriptions under the same tenant. But can I go add a new free trail again? So how do you add subscription out here? So outright, you'll have something called subscription here. When you click on this, you'll basically go to a subscriptions page where they would show you all the subscriptions that you actually have under this tenant. Now, if you click on add here, it will now ask, oh, okay, fine. You want to add another subscription. That's fine. I'll go ahead and help you out with another subscription. Now, you will not see in this particular page, you will not go ahead and see something like a free trial subscription again. Rather, you will see different subscriptions like pay as you go and the other models that are available. Azure for students and all the offers that are available. Now it will also check for pay as you go and say, you know what, I don't see you have the eligibility for pay as you go. And it will show you all the different subscriptions that are available out there in with Azure. So how many subscriptions can you create again in a tenant? Not limited. You can create n number of types of subscriptions until it's not a free trial. Until it's not a free trial. You can only have one free trial, and post that Azure will block you from free trial, but you can basically have multiple subscriptions other than free trial. Then the question is, guys, why do you need so many subscriptions in one tenant? Like, why do companies really use so many subscriptions under one tenant? And this is one of the most popular interview questions when you talk about subscriptions out here. That why does a company require so many subscriptions under the same tenant? Then what is the logic of having it? Now let's see that diagrammatically. Imagine this is one of the Azure tenant that you have, and imagine this tenant is owned not by you, not by me, but a company called Tata. So let's put that here. So this is a tenant that is belonging to a company called Tata, right? And Tata has multiple subsidiaries under it, meaning multiple companies under it. Like, what are the different companies that have? Like, for example, you have Tata Motors, you have Tata Steel, you have Tata Finance, so on and so forth. For our purpose, let's take Motors. Let's take something like Steel. Let's take something like Finance. So there are three models, or there are three companies who are falling under Tata, but each and every company under it has a specific specialty area. Like Motors is only, let's say, with cars and etc. Steel produces a lot of steel and so much and stuff. And finance, basically finance is the customer and etc. Now Tata wants to take all these three companies to the cloud. They want all these resources to the cloud, and let's say Tata is using the Azure cloud. So now the question what Tata tells Microsoft is that, you know what, I need a model in such a way that an employee of Tata Motors can or should only log into the Tata Motors Azure subscription. An employee of Tata Steel should only be able to log into Azure the Tata Steel subscription of Azure, and vice versa. Employee of the Tata Finance should only be able to log into, let's say, Tata Finance, not the other way around. Tata Steel employee cannot log into Tata Motors, and Tata Motors employee cannot log into Tata Steel, and vice versa. So Azure or Microsoft tells that, okay, fine, we have the perfect model for something like this. Go ahead and create multiple subscriptions. Each and every subscription is its own isolated island, meaning each and every subscription is isolated from the other. And you can create users at each and every individual subscription. And users that are created, let's say at a subscription A, will only have access to that particular subscription A, and users that are created at subscription B will have only access to subscription B, and C is C. So it's a one-to-one relationship is what Microsoft tells you. Then Tata asks, okay, fine, but all these three companies are under me, but the billing should be generated to me. Microsoft says, yes, this is called a tenant subscriber model. Imagine the tenant as a parent and the subscriptions are children under it. And the billing that each and every subscription does gets generated at the tenant level, and the tenant pays for the bill. So the tenant is the actual owner who pays the bill that's getting generated at each and every subscription that is falling under its own self. So the question is, why do you need multiple subscriptions under the same tenant? The answer is for isolation, for such a kind of a model where the tenant is the parent company and they can be multiple subscribers under the same tenant, and multiple subscribers can stay isolated on its own. You do not need any communication as such. Then the question here is that, okay, I understand this, that's fine. There is like multiple subscriptions under the same tenant and there is an isolation for the users. Then the question is, how will Azure know that, you know what, this is an employee of Tata Motors, I have to log him only into the Tata Motors subscription. This is an employee of Tata Steel, I only have to log him to the Tata Steel subscription, and so on and so forth. How does Azure really know that? Like, you know what, this is how. So Azure should employ something in the backend, right? Azure should have something like a backend database, right? Where it can store all the customers to where they belong, to which subscription they belong, right? So this entirely is called as an Azure authentication model, meaning how does Azure authenticate its users? Then let's understand that firstly, but with a simpler example. Let's see how websites do it. Like generally how websites do it. Let's imagine I am a user who's using a Google Chrome browser and I am going to, let's say, facebook.com. Now, what is the first thing that Facebook asks me for? Facebook, even before it can log me into my account, asks me something called a username and a password, right? It needs a username and a password so that it can see whether my username and password are right. But how does Facebook in itself know that the username and password are right? It has something called a backend database. Like most of the websites do this. So it has a backend database where it stores all these usernames and password in there. All the users, all their usernames and all their password are stored in a backend database. And when you hit your browser, meaning when you load your browser and you click on facebook.com, and when you enter your username and password, facebook.com verifies it on the backend registry. And it sees, okay, fine, the username and password is right. I see that the user is good. Now I'll talk to the browser. Facebook servers, the server of Facebook, talk to your browser and it will send something called as an authentication token. What's that? Authentication token. Nothing but a very unique alphanumeric string just telling you that, you know what? Yes, this user is genuine. And what does your browser do this authentication token? Your browser caches the authentication token in its memory. Meaning every browser has its own history. Every browser has its own cache memory where it stores all these things. Now that's the reason, guys, you would have observed if you do not log out from your Facebook account and you just close it and you again open your Facebook account and just type in Facebook account, it will not ask you for your username and password. Rather, it will just log you into the Facebook account. Why? It's because your browser already has an authentication token in its cache memory. It does not require another new cache. So what does Facebook.com first see is whether this browser has a authentication token or not, and then lets you in directly without even checking its database. That's the reason when you clear your cache and cookies, right, and when you clear your entire browsing history, and when you again try to sign into a website, it will ask you for your ID, it will ask you for your password and etc. Because the authentication token that was provided earlier has got expired. There is no authentication token that is in the cache memory of your browser. So this is, let's say, a very general overview, or this is, let's say, a very high level view of how an authentication really looks like. Then how does Microsoft Azure do it as such? Now, Microsoft Azure has a backend database in the form of something called as identity provider. Now, what's an identity provider? Very simple. Imagine it to be like a telephone directory, which has all the which has all the names and numbers. In the same way, the identity provider for Azure has all the usernames and passwords that are stored in it, which a user like me or like you cannot see it. It's encrypted. It's in a very secure location. And the identity provider for Azure is called as an Azure Active Directory, which is the first terminology that we are technically using out there. What is this called? It's called Azure Active Directory. What is Active Directory? See, it's nothing but like a telephone directory out there, which has all the users and it has all the user roles. Like what can a user really do? And how can the user really log in? And if the user is really logging in, is he logging in with, let's say, his own ID, his own password, and is he entering the right ID and right password and stuff like that? And Azure trusts the identity provider. There is a trust relationship between Azure and the Active Directory. If the Active Directory says a no, Azure will not let a user in. So how does the authentication model really work in Azure? Is that again in the same example, there's a user, I have a browser, like I'm using a Chrome browser, and I am going ahead and signing into I am going ahead and logging into Azure. And how do I log in? It's called portal.azure.com. As in when I say portal.azure.com, my browser takes me to the Azure homepage. And what does Azure do? Azure says, okay, fine, you know what, this is a new user, I don't know who he is. And Azure will redirect you to the identity provider, which is the Active Directory. And as and when Azure redirects you to the Active Directory, Active Directory will present you with a page called username and password. Username and password, please. As in when you enter the username and password, Active Directory will see, oh, okay, fine, he has entered a username and password. Now let me verify whether the username and password are correct or wrong. It will say, okay, if it's correct, it'll say, okay, fine, this is correct. Let me go ahead and sign the user into him and sign in the user. Now Active Directory in written gives you something called as an access token. In earlier example also, Facebook was giving you what? An access token. In the same way, Active Directory will give you something called as an access token out there. And this access token is cached in your browser, and then you are logged into your Azure account. Now this is how the backend actually works really. So let's see that practically. Like let's see how does this really work. Now as such, I am logged into my account right now. So let me go ahead and sign out myself. So I have like signed out. Let me again say portal.azure.com home, and whatever account is there, I'll go ahead and say forget. Okay, so I'm like starting fresh right now. I do not have an account with me. So let me sign in, but this time let me sign in a bit differently. Let me open up something called as developer tools on my browser. Now, how does it look like? Like, do I have to install anything for the developer tools? Not really. Every browser will come with its own developer tools. And how do you have to load your developer tool? By pressing F12 on your keyboard. As in when you press the, or as in when you hit the F12 on your keyboard, you will be presented with this particular window out here, which will say, you know what, this is your developer console and etc. Now, what will this really show? Let's see how it shows. So I will take my ID and I will say, okay, fine, this is my ID. Let me say hit next. This is where your call or this is where your request is being redirected toward the Azure Active Directory. And how is it redirected? This is, let's say, the response that you're sending. And if you were to look at this response, right, all this, it says, okay, fine. If I look at it, it's just telling you, you know what, the username is something something @gmail.com. This is the user who's trying to request. Now, Active Directory in return says, okay, fine, you know what? I see that you are a user within me, but to confirm further, can you give me your password? So I'll say, okay, fine. I'll give my password to you. And I'll say, okay, fine, sign in. As in, when I do this, it will do a lot in the backend. It will say, okay, fine, you know what? I'm authorizing you. Let's see if you're there or not. And then finally, it gives me something called an authorization token. This is how an authorization token will really look like. This entire string is what your authorization token really is. Okay, didn't get copied properly, not a problem. But this is how your token would actually look like. So it's giving you a very random number, a very random alphanumeric string. And as in when it's like giving you, right? Your browser is telling, okay, fine, I got a 200 OK status, which means I am good enough. I am good right now. And this is all your authentication token. It says, okay, fine, all this is my authentication token. Let me take it and let me cache it in my memory. And now my browser has cached this out. So what if I close my window and again log into portal.azure.com home? Now what is going to happen is that since my browser knows the ID, since my browser knows what is the authentication token, it will not ask me for the ID and password again. It just logged me into right away. It did not really ask anything out there. So this is how really the backend of a cloud works. And why am I explaining this really is because you'll have to understand what really happens behind the cloud before even visiting what cloud is. So any questions on this topic, guys? Anything? I can take a quick question for 2 minutes and then we can forward. Are you all comfortable? Did you all understand with this?
Do we need to integrate our in-house Active Directory with Azure, or how it works?
You do not have to. Azure itself gives you something called as an Active Directory. So this is an Active Directory on the cloud. This is an Active Directory on the cloud that Azure offers you as and when you create your subscription.
Okay.
So you do not really have to integrate your on-premises Active Directory until and unless you want to sync the users between your on-prem and the cloud. Okay, fine then. Then I have logged into the Azure portal and I can go ahead and create anything. I can go ahead, create whatever I want. I can go ahead, do whatever I want with the portal. Then let's imagine again, you have a big company where you have different teams, right? You have a developer team, you have a quality analysis team, you have an engineering team, You have a DevOps team and all the people working together. Then will all the teams have the same access? Not really. Developers, QAs may not have the same access as DevOps on the portal, because DevOps generally has like good amount of access on the portal to go ahead and create resources, delete resources, and etc. And you have an administrative team which will go ahead and create users and etc. Then how will Azure know what kind of a role that you have? Or to put the question in a further simpler way, how does Azure identify the roles that are assigned to you? Now, there is a concept called RBAC, which is also called role-based access control. What does role-based access control really mean? And what are really the roles that are offered in Azure? Now, as such, Azure offers a lot of roles to a lot of users. There are a lot of roles that you can actually select and assign it to your users. But if I were to broadly classify, then they can fall under three different categories. One being your owner, the other being your contributor, third being a reader. Now, this is another interview question. What are the three different roles that Azure really offers? So, owner, contributor, and reader. Then, how are they different from each other? What will they have with each other and stuff like that? Now, owner is generally a project administrator in one of the projects. In the project that you work, owner would be the administrator of the project. Now, as the role indicates, owner can have a complete control over the subscription. Owner can create users into that particular subscription, meaning let's say there is someone new to the team and you need to add them to the Azure subscription. Who can do it? It's the person who has an RBAC called owner. Owner can also go ahead create different resources. Owner can also go ahead and make another user an administrator. So in short, owner can assign RBAC roles to other users, create resources, modify resources, and also go ahead and delete the resources. So owner has all these permissions that he can do. But imagine if everyone is an owner in your subscription. So I am an owner, I am adding a user, but you are also an owner. You do not know that I have added the user and you went ahead and deleted that user. Then what is the purpose of having so many owners? You should have not more than 2 owners for a subscription, and they should be a point of control that they can only add users and you have to request them to add users and etc. Now then, what are the other roles then? Let's say you are not an owner, you are just someone who wants to create resources, test resources on the Azure cloud. You can be a contributor. You can be something called as a contributor out here. Now, what can a contributor really do? A contributor can do everything an owner can do, but he cannot add or create or delete a user. So a contributor does not have the access to create a new user or to delete a user or anything related to the users. Apart from this particular thing called add or create, he can do everything what an owner can do, like creating resources, deleting the existing resource, modifying the resource, but he cannot again add what? A user, or he cannot modify the permission of a user like an owner can do. The last category is a reader. And a user assigned with a reader permission can do nothing. He can just come to your portal and see what are the resources that are created. That's it. Then why is there a reader role? Because sometimes you have something called auditing that is happening to your entire subscriptions. So the client wants to appoint an auditor who just wants to look at what are the resources that are there. how many resources have you created, and have you correctly said that, you know what, this is the amount that is getting generated. But that particular guy, who's an auditor, does not have any understanding of the Azure subscription, any understanding of how to create resources. So he just wants to see what is in there. So Azure offers you something called as a reader access also like this. So how can I then assign roles? How can you, or how can we, how can people really assign roles out here? The first thing to assign a role is what? You need yourself to be an owner. So am I the owner of my subscription? How would I know that? Click on Azure Active Directory, and here it's going to show you, okay, fine, you know what? You have all these things out here, and you know what? There is only one user in your subscription, which is you yourself, and you are an administrator. So you are a member on the Active Directory, but when you come to the subscription, and it will show you what is your role on the subscription. You are an account administrator / an owner. So you can add anyone into your subscription. Then how do I add it? If I come onto the subscription, it will say, okay, fine, this is your subscription. Do whatever you want, because you are basically an administrator out here. So come here to something called IAM, also known as Identity and Access Management. You click here, it will tell you, okay, fine, you know what? You can do a lot of things. You can add a role, you can deny a role, and etc. So what do I want to do? I want to add a role. So now it will tell you what are the number of roles that are there on the Azure portal as such. If you click on the drop down, these are the number of roles. Like, you have an exhaustive list, but everything falls under 3 categories called owner, contributor, and reader. Now let's say someone wants to create something apart from owner, contributor, or reader. And let's say someone wants to basically assign some role like this. Then how do you know what this role will do? Just go on to the I button out here and just say, okay, fine, you know what? This role allows something like this. And let's say if I want to understand what an owner is, grants full access to manage all resources, including ability to assign roles in Azure. What contributor is? Everything, but you cannot you cannot add a user into your portal. What a reader does not allow you to make any changes. Simply you can go ahead and see your subscription, see your resources in that particular subscription. Now, if I assign a reader role, how do I assign a reader role to someone? Now, they are not there in my Active Directory. So let's say I'm using something like a dummy account, gmail.com, and it says, you know what? The user is not there in your ID. Do you want to go ahead and assign him a role? Do you want to invite him? I'll say, yes, I want to invite him. And what I'll say, first thing, as Azure will go ahead and send out an invitation email. And Azure will create a role assignment called a reader in the Active Directory for this particular user. Now, if I go back to my Active Directory, it says 2 users. One is myself, and the other is a guest whom I have just invited. And if you hover around it, it will also tell you who has invited this particular user out there. Who has invited it? Did the user join, or did the user do anything? Not really. So it's just a test account which you can go ahead and see, okay, fine, this is the user and all that stuff. Now, this is how you add a user. So I went to the subscription, again a quick recap. I went into the free trial. I said IAM, or identity or access management. I clicked on add. I said add a role assignment, and I went ahead and selected a role out of the available, and I went ahead and gave the email ID of that particular user. And as in, when I gave an email ID, what did Azure do? Azure did 2 things. Firstly, it says, you know what, this user is not invited. Let me go ahead and invite him. So what will happen is that Microsoft will send across an email to testuser@gmail.com, asking him, you know what, you have been invited into this particular Active Directory as a reader. Do you want to go ahead and sign up yourself for? Says yes. If you say yes, there will be a link. You just have to click the link and it will take you to the Azure portal where you can create your own password associated with this particular user. So whenever you log into Azure with a test user, you'll be using testuser@gmail.com and the password associated with it. That's how Azure is going to know that, you know what, this test user is assigned what? Is assigned a reader role on the subscription. So I don't have to have him, give him access to the Active Directory. He should not be able to add a user. He should not be able to delete a user. He should not be able to do anything, but rather just see what is in there. That's it. Guys, are you all okay till here? Any quick question that I can take? And please note, this is one of the most important questions that can be asked in the interview. What are the different roles that you have assigned? What does each role give you? So when you have time, please go ahead, click on this and just read about each and every role that is in there. How do you read it? Just hover it out here and it'll tell you what is the role that, or what is the power that you can actually get with each and every role. And these are a lot of roles out there, and according to, let's say, the requirement, you can go ahead and add a user in one particular role as such. And if I want to check someone's access, I can also see, okay, fine, I want to see a test user. It says, okay, fine, I can check what is the access the user has. The user has what? A reader access. And it's also telling you, you know what, views all the resources but does not allow to make any change. And this user has an access where? On this entire subscription, because I have added him at the subscription level out here. So I have added a user at this particular level at one particular subscription. So I have added someone as a reader onto that particular subscription, and he can only look into that particular subscription and he cannot do anything in that subscription as such. Guys, any questions, any quick thing that I can take before we move forward? Okay, then this is all fine. Then we are learning the cloud, right? We are learning firstly a cloud basically. Then what is the purpose of cloud in that case? Like, for example, let's take Azure only. Like, what is really the purpose of having a cloud? What is really, let's say, the sole criteria for having a cloud? For a layman, okay, let's imagine I don't know anything about the cloud. For a layman, the basic purpose of cloud is doing what? Is to store his data, right? The first cloud that I ever worked with, or the first cloud that I ever saw, was a cloud called Google Drive. The only thing that I knew is that, you know what, I can store like unlimited data into that particular drive out there. So all my data, instead of being on my computer, which is an on-premises, I can go ahead and store all this data and send all this data to the cloud. Same way, yes, Azure also, the one of the basic purposes of it is storage of your data. But what kind of a data? Let's look at that. Like, what kind of a data is it? Like business data or personal data? What is it? That's up to you. It's up to the business what's storing the data. But is that the only purpose of having the cloud? Like, is that the only purpose? For a layman, yes. For someone who doesn't know anything about the cloud, yes. But someone who's working with the cloud, of course, no. There are other purposes associated with the cloud. And the second or the most important purposes is hosting applications. Now, right in the first class, we said, you know what? You are developing an application called Ola, you have the code for Ola. Now the question is, where do you put that code? You can host all your code on the cloud, and you can give the URL to your users, and people can visit your applications, which is hosted out of a cloud. So the second and the very important application of a cloud is hosting your applications. Now, how do you host your applications and etc.? We're going to cover it in a very great detail. We're going to see how you put your code and etc. in a very great detail. So first purpose, storage, yes, certainly. Second, hosting your applications. Third, I just said miscellaneous, meaning cloud even today, or cloud today is also being used for other purposes or reasons like artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced analytics, big data. All these things are also leveraging cloud as their backbone. So if you were to look at a very high view, then these are, let's say, the basic purposes of the cloud. Then let's look at the very basic purpose, which is like storage. Like what really is, let's say, the purpose behind, let's say, storage. So I have a subscription, okay? I have a subscription, I have a tenant, I have a valid tenant ID. Now, can I go ahead and create anything over the cloud? For me, let's say I want to create a resource that can store data. Can I do that? Yes, of course you can do that. Do you need anything? Yes. You need something called as a resource group. Now, what really is a resource group? Now, the terminology or the textbook terminology is that it's a logical namespace where you can start creating your resources. So let's understand this, or let's say debug this a bit more, because of course this is like a bit technical. Then what is it? Now, if I were to compare it with my laptop, with the architecture of my laptop, the tenant ID, right, is the representation of an operating system. So tenant ID can be what? The operating system, without which I cannot really work. That's your basic. You have an operating system. Do you need anything? Yes. You also need what? A user account, right? User account is your subscription in Azure. User account, a subscription in Azure. Now you have a user account, you have an operating system. Can you go ahead and just put your files out there? Can you go ahead and just store your data out there? Not really. You also need to have something called drives, right? E drive, C drive, D drive, and all that stuff. Only then you can go ahead and create something, right? That drive is nothing but your resource group in Azure. So resource group is nothing but a logical namespace where you can store all your resources. In my computer, I store all my files, but in Azure, I go ahead and do it under a resource group as such. Guys, any questions here? Anything that I can take quickly? Okay, silent is golden. Okay. Then question is, how do you create a resource group? Like if resource group is the basic entity that you should basically go ahead and create on the cloud, then how do you really create a resource group? Now you can create resource groups in multiple ways. Like you can say resource groups out here, you have something called resource groups. You can go ahead and click on this and create it, or you can also type in resource groups. You can click here and you can say add a resource group. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's say create a resource group. Now as soon as I create a resource group, it will ask me a few details like what are the project details. So what is the subscription that you want to create this under? Now as such, in my tenant, I only have one subscription, which is a free trial. I do not have multiple, right? So that is the reason this drop down is only showing me one subscription. But you have multiple subscriptions, let's say, and you have access to those multiple subscriptions, then all those subscriptions will be shown under this particular drop down. But in my case, it's only one. Second thing, it's asking me, you know what, give me a proper name to your resource group. Like give me some name to identify that this is your resource group. So I'll say this is a test hyphen Kiran hyphen delete. So I want to delete this resource group after I create it. So I say I'm just giving a proper name to this resource group, and I'm seeing something like this. Now the question is, Azure is now asking you, where do you want to create this particular resource group? Like I have a lot of locations in the entire world, meaning each and every location is representing what, guys? Representing a data center. And what a data center is? Nothing but collection of servers. And Microsoft is now asking me, oh, you want to create a resource, so I have to give you some sort of infrastructure. So in which location that you want to create that particular resource group in? You can select anything as such, but the general convention is that your region has to be close to your business. Let's say I am creating an application for India, so I will select India. If you just type in India, you have Central India, South India, West India, and the recommended region is what? Central India. Why is it that way, guys? Again, going back to our first class, we said what? Azure region pairs, right? Where you have multiple data centers. And Central India, in my case, has multiple data centers when compared to South India or West India. That's the reason Microsoft is telling, you know what, I recommend you to create Central India, but it's your wish. You can also go ahead and choose from South or West India also. So I say, okay, fine. It's Central India. And it says, okay, fine. This is all the mandatory details that I require. So everything that you see in star is a required field. So even when you fill up an application online, right, you'll have all these things out, right? Like mandatory fields and non-mandatory fields. And say it's saying, okay, fine. Do you want to go next? I'll say, okay, fine, next. It says tags. Now, what are tags? Very simple. You are creating a resource, this particular resource group for a development team in your organization. But you're not only creating one resource group, you are creating thousands and thousands of resource group for different teams. Then how do you identify to which team this particular resource group belongs? One way is with the name. I can add something called developer. The other way is something called tags. I can say team and I can say developers. This particular tag will be associated with this particular resource group, and someone who's just visiting your resource group can look at the tag and say, okay, fine, you know what, the development team is the owner of this. And who is the owner? I can give xyz@gmail.com or xyz@somecompany.com. I can add multiple tags to it. I can say industry, I can say IT, I can add multiple tags to it, which will help someone who's visiting to your resource group to see who's the team, who's the owner. Just in case something goes wrong, I can contact this owner directly. I do not have to reach out to anyone else. Now, the same thing, you cannot do it here, right? You cannot put the username, you cannot put all these things out here. So that is the reason an effective way of identification is a tagging. So I put some tags. What can I do? I'll say review and create. I'll say, you know what? This is what your subscription is. Are you okay with all these things? And as in when you click on create, right? It will go ahead and it will create a resource group for you. It says, okay, fine. You know what? I created a resource group and this resource group name is called something like this in a location called Central India. And when you click on this resource group, it will tell you, you know what? These are your tags. So if someone is visiting here, they can say, okay, fine. This is a development team. He is the owner and this is the industry. This is how you can go ahead and create a resource group, guys. And resource group is the basic entity in Azure. Now, what I want you all to do for today is just go through this class, read about RBACs. What are the different RBACs and how do you create RBACs and etc. And create a resource group. And believe me, guys, these are the two very important things from an interview perspective. That what are role-based access controls and what are the different role-based access controls that are offered by Azure. And where do you read it? Just type in Google, just type in, let's say, RBAC Azure, and you will get an entire documentation out of it saying what is RBAC, as simple as what is RBAC and what are the roles in RBAC. You also have a lot of videos basically that you can follow. So please read this documentation, and this is very, very important. And please, if let's say time permits, go ahead and make a bit of notes about RBACs for your own understanding. But this video, what you get would be more than sufficient enough to see what are RBACs and etc. And also go ahead and create a resource group firstly. And tomorrow when we meet, we are going to talk about a resource called storage account, which is something used to store data and etc. Which is, let's say, the basic resource, or which is, let's say, one of the core resources that we are going to deal with. So with this, I am good to end the session today, and I am good to take some questions. So guys, if you all have any questions, now is your time. Please go ahead and ask me what are the questions that you have. Guys, any questions? Did you all understand the session today?
One question. Okay. So, on what basis, like how many resource groups we create in a subscription?
So it depends upon what you want to really achieve out there. Like, let's say I can have one resource group where I can put all my resources in, and also I can have one resource group per a resource type. Let's say I want one resource group for everything that is related to storages. I can have the other resource group for everything that's related to something like networking. I can have a third resource group for everything that is related to something else. Or I can have one resource group per a team. I can have one resource group for a developer, one resource group for a QA, one resource group for a DevOps, one resource group for, let's say, the HR. I can have segregations in that way. So it all depends upon the project hierarchy that you actually set in. Does that answer your question, Kapil?
Yeah. Yep. And how many subscriptions generally a company have? If you take a mid company, how many subscriptions it will have?
There is no hard and fast rule about how many subscriptions a company can have. A company technically can have like a number of subscriptions. For example, in a project that I am working in, I have somewhere around 24 subscriptions where I have like different roles in each and every subscription. I was a part of a project where it had only one subscription. So it depends upon what the company really want to achieve and what is the budget of that particular project. So you can have one, you can have multiple.
Okay.
Hi Kiran, Chandra here. I have one doubt.
Sure, Chandra, go ahead.
Yeah, suppose we created one resource group and assigned one VM for that, and we created a secondary resource group, and we created a virtual network on that.
Okay.
So in that case, we have the network is in different region and virtual machine is in different region. So there is a problem and in that situation.
So the thing is, Chandra, it doesn't matter where your resource group is sitting in and where your resources are sitting in. Like there is no relation between the resource group region and the resource itself. So there will not be any problem as such.
Okay, but we selected different regions in different subscription, different resource groups, right? So
Exactly.
what the purpose of the reason then during
So
creation of resource
the
group?
purpose of a region is just to hold a namespace. So resource group is nothing but what? It's a namespace. It's not actual resource. It is just a namespace for your resources to sit in. So when you create a namespace, right, any of the namespace, it will occupy somewhere around 1 or 2 kbs of space, right? So to allocate that 1 or 2 kb of space, Microsoft is asking you which data center that you want to actually select. So in general, what is going to happen is like something like this. Your resource group and the resources would in general be sitting in one region. I mean, I don't see a point in having resource group in one region and resources in the other, but it is very much possible. I'm not telling that it's not possible. It is very much possible. You can have such a kind of a model, but generally projects follow a norm or projects follow a norm wherein your resource group and your resources are sitting in the same region as such.
Okay, so the recommendation would be both network and VM should be on the same resource group, right? If I'm not wrong.
Not really. You do not have to have such a kind of a separation. Like there is no hard and fast recommendation that your network and the virtual machine should fall in the same subscription, but it's very important for your network and the virtual machine to be in the same region. Otherwise you cannot go ahead and pair both of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So that
again,
is my question actually.
no,
So we
your
have
question was the region, right? The
no,
question
no,
was
yeah, region, yeah,
about the region of the resource group.
correct. So we created different resource groups, two resource groups in different regions. One is
Right.
VM, one is virtual network.
Mhm.
So can we mix both and work perfectly without any issue, without any delay?
Now the issue is that in your question is that you are talking about resource groups and you're talking about resources as such inside it. I am not
Right.
talking about the resources. I am not talking about the resource at all because I don't want to go into that resource topic because resource again is a big topic in its own way. I am talking about the resource group and not a resource actually.
Okay.
So
Okay. Got it.
yes,
Got it.
your resource group in a different region and your resource can be in a different region. So if I now go ahead and explain what are resources, then it will end up confusing a lot of people. So I'm not going into that particular topic out there.
Yeah, yeah. As of now, I got
Yeah,
it. So we can
yeah,
create different reasons for different resource groups. That's what
yes,
I.
that's correct. Yes,
Okay,
guys,
we'll
any
see on
question?
the
Yeah,
resource subject.
yep. When we touch upon that, we'll definitely cover. We will definitely have to cover the question that you asked, and that's a brilliant question that you really asked out.
Thank you.
No problem, guys. Any further questions? If there aren't any further questions, then are we good to go ahead and close the session for today?
Yes.
Okay. Great then. So the only expectation from you all today is that please go ahead and read about RBAC's role-based access control, and please try to go ahead and create resource groups, different resource groups, let's say, in your subscription. So that's it from my end today, guys. Then we will meet tomorrow the same time at 8 a.m. and we will discuss more on Azure. We will discuss more on a resource called storage accounts. Okay, guys, have a great day ahead and we will meet tomorrow.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.